Did you know there's an event that could have changed everything between the US and Canada, but very few people know about it? What if I told you that the relationship between these two countries nearly collapsed due to one bold move from Canada, and the whole world watched in disbelief? This is a hidden story that many overlook, but it had the potential to shift the future of not just US-Canada relations, but the global political landscape. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll see a side of world politics you've probably never heard before. In the years leading up to this shocking moment, things weren't going well between the US and Canada. The relationship, once built on close ties and mutual interests, was strained under President Donald Trump. His policies, particularly his stance on trade, pushed many countries, including Canada, to the edge. One of the most significant points of tension was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Trump wanted to renegotiate it, which naturally made Canada nervous. As talks dragged on, the uncertainty created frustration. But it didn't stop there. Then came the tariffs. In 2018, Trump imposed heavy tariffs on steel and aluminum, affecting Canadian industries in ways that felt like an attack on their sovereignty. In response, Canada didn't back down. Instead, they retaliated with their own tariffs on US goods. These moves only escalated the situation. But it wasn't just the tariffs. Trump's America First agenda created waves worldwide. His decisions to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement and impose restrictive trade policies were making allies question America's place in the world. And Canada, along with other nations, was beginning to push back. But what no one saw coming was Canada's response. In 2018, after Trump imposed his tariffs, Canada made a move that shocked the world. Trudeau's government made the bold decision to impose tariffs on US goods, hurting key sectors in both countries. Canada had sent a message to the world: we will not be bullied. It wasn't just a move about trade, it was a political statement. For the first time in modern history, a neighbor of the US took action that directly challenged Trump's leadership. The retaliation wasn't just about economic pain. It was about power, about showing that Canada wasn't going to just roll over under pressure. This was an unprecedented act of defiance against the US by a close ally. But Canada wasn't alone. The world was watching, and other countries had to make their decision. The ripple effect was immediate. Leaders from around the globe started taking sides. Countries in Europe, particularly Germany, France, and the UK, began voicing their support for Canada. The diplomatic isolation of the US had begun. At the 2018 G7 summit, things came to a head. Leaders like Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron openly criticized Trump's approach to global issues, and they aligned themselves with Canada's decision. It wasn't just about Canada anymore. It was about the broader world standing up to Trump's aggressive foreign policy. This was a turning point. Countries that had long been allies of the US now found themselves questioning their allegiance. Canada had ignited a global reaction that Trump hadn't expected, and the political fallout was just beginning. The consequences were massive. It wasn't just about trade wars anymore. It was about a global shift in power. The economic impact was real. Canada's retaliatory tariffs hurt US businesses, and the American economy felt the effects as trade barriers grew higher. But beyond the economy, the bigger picture was even more alarming for Trump. As more countries began to join the resistance against his policies, the US found itself isolated. The America First mantra, which had once seemed like a powerful political message, now looked more like a rallying cry for division. The world was no longer listening to America. The global trade system was fracturing, and the consequences of this breakdown were far-reaching. Canada had led the charge, but it wasn't just their economy on the line. It was the entire political landscape of the West. Trump, of course, didn't take this lying down. His reaction was just as expected. He doubled down. He continued to defend his tariffs, his policies, and the America First ideology. He made public speeches, posted tweets, and even tried to negotiate new trade deals with countries that were beginning to reject his approach. But despite his efforts, the damage was already done. Trump's attempt to steer the narrative only highlighted how much of a global outcast the US was becoming. His relationship with Canada had deteriorated further, and now, more nations were watching him closely, waiting to see how far he would go to keep his policies in place. The reality was clear. Trump's isolation on the world stage was growing, and no matter how hard he tried, the damage from the growing resistance was irreversible. Years later, few people remember the moment when Canada stood up and changed the global order. But in reality, it was a defining moment that could have shifted the future of international relations. The stakes were higher than anyone realized at the time. If the world had united earlier against Trump's policies, perhaps the trajectory of global politics could have been drastically different. Instead, countries like Canada had to take matters into their own hands. And in doing so, they not only changed their relationship with the US but also reshaped global diplomacy. This story, though largely forgotten by many, remains one of the most important moments in modern politics. It was the moment when the world refused to stay silent any longer. This story may not be in the history books, but the consequences of Canada's bold move were felt across the world for years. What if the world had acted sooner? Would the international landscape have looked very different? Would Trump have been forced to reconsider his approach to global affairs?